Hey guys,
I'm
I'm Noah.
It says
Hey guys, I'm Noah,
I'm Koa.
and welcome back to the 160 podcast. And today we're joined with a special guest, Asher.
Hello.
And we're really excited to have you as our first guest on the 160, and we're really excited to get into it. Koa, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, can you give us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah. So like I said, my name's Asher. I'm 24. It's kind of confusing where I come from because I was born in Australia, but my dad's from New Zealand and my mom is from the United States. But at the age of 4, I came to Mexico. So I've been here since I was 4 years old, and then a few years in California, but pretty much here's where I grew up.
So, Asher, what was it like growing up in Mexico?
Gosh, that's a good question. Growing up in Mexico is, of course, very different to Australia and to New Zealand, to the United States. Mexico is very, very beautiful country. The language, Spanish, is amazing. Honestly, it was a really unique experience because I don't think many people have the opportunity to live the life that I am living and have lived. My parents actually, the reason why we came to Mexico is because, well, when I was 4, my parents were serving in an organization called YWAM, and that stands for Youth with a Mission. So it's a Christian missions organization or movement that exists to mobilize and send people into the nations. So it follows the Great Commission. It's been amazing. So I came because they were starting a YWAM base in the city of Mazatlan. And so because I was here, I got put into school. I got to learn the language, which was really tough. And life was just very different. You know, you go from playing rugby to now soccer or football. And yeah, it's a very interesting life. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Obviously, it has its ups and downs because learning a new language as a kid is really, really hard. And especially your skin color and you're very different. You stand out. But life here was great. We lived very uniquely where people would come and go. Every 6 months, there was they use DTS is what they call it, discipleship training school. People would come and go and be sent out to the nations, and then you get a new batch of people, and it was like you're constantly trading friends. It's almost like you're getting more and more. And what was funny is that they would come from all different parts of the world. So I grew up with knowing people from Switzerland and Germany, and then people from Brazil and people from the US and Canada. So there's so many different cultures in my life. And I think that in many ways it kind of shaped me. But then also I was growing up with a culture of the Mexican culture, which was all of my friends and people. So I had to speak English and Spanish in both settings. So that's a little bit of how I grew up. And obviously, being in YWAM, it's you have so many consistent friendships throughout the years, but then many that do come and go. And I think when I finished actually high school, I started to kind of ask myself, like, what do I really want to do? My parents really love the Lord, and I wanted to love the Lord, but didn't feel like I had a really strong relationship with Him. And so the advice was, hey, maybe you should leave YWAM and go find your own journey with God. So I looked and I was like, okay, maybe I'll go do YWAM somewhere else, another base. And so I actually applied to a few different YWAM bases around the world. And then anyone who would call me and say, hey, I saw that you applied. Are Brent and Heather your parents? And I would say, yeah. And for me, it didn't bring me comfort because I wanted to go somewhere where nobody knew who my family or knew that I was in YWAM. I wanted to go somewhere new. So I actually ended up going to this place called Bethel Church up in Redding, California. And when you think California, you would think like beach and tropical. Well, not really tropical, but like surfing and yeah, it is that, but I was up in the northern part of California, so it's quite a large state, So I went up there to this small town called Redding in the middle of like nowhere. It's 3 hours away from the beach. And if you know me, you know that I love surfing. So giving up the ocean and surfing was one of the hardest decisions I had to make. But I knew that it was worth it because I was going to go discover my relationship with God even more. So when I was up there, I fully just decided, you know what? This is like one chance in my life. I'm 18 years old. I'm just gonna give it my all. I'm gonna be prepared to know people, that they can know me. They can see right through me, like I'm being transparent. And that's what I did. And honestly, through that journey of being transparent and really allowing God to come into my life and really take things out. It's kind of like when you go gardening and you see like all these bad leaves, you just kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna make it more beautiful. It's kind of like that. There was many things that he was pulling off of what felt like my tree of life, and he's saying that's actually not very pleasing, and there were some bad roots and stuff. And it was a very humbling journey. And actually, when I was up there, I realized I how much I love missions and how much I love working with young people my age, because I was still young. And that's where I really got on fire for the Lord and decided I think that there's something more for my life. But I didn't really know what that was. I just knew that I had that passion. Yeah.
And yeah, that's great. And what kind of brought you back to Mexico?
Oh man, it's a full circle story. So when I was up in California, we would do in this school, we would do 2-week outreaches, and I did 2 outreaches. One year, the first year I went to Ireland, it was great. The second year I went back to Ireland, and during that time, when I was in Ireland, we were traveling around. We were doing this like 3-day conference thing in Northern Ireland, in a place called Belfast. And so while we were up there and we were hosting different things at churches, on the last night of the conference, someone comes up to me. And they they came up to my outreach leader and they're like, hey, does anyone on your team happen to speak Spanish or is from a Latin nation? So obviously I'm not from a Latin nation. I'm not Mexican by blood or Latin by blood at all. I just speak Spanish. And some would say that I can speak it maybe some better than some others. But and so it was me and these 4 or 5 other guys. And these guys were also from Mexico, Peru, Guatemala, Argentina. But a lot of them had lived in the States, so they technically were Latin. So none of us were full, like, I'm a Latino and I live in Latin America and I speak Spanish and that's my life. We were all somewhat had been immersed in the culture. So he gets us in this half circle and he says, I actually wanted to pray for you because I felt like the Lord is asking me to. So we're like, okay, like we're packing down the conference, all these like cables and stuff, and we're trying to like, we had set up for 3 days. We're now like, it's a big, big deal. Like all the big speakers and everything, because there was, I think, like 700 people attended. So we're like trying to clean up, and he's getting us in this full circle, this like half circle, and all these people around us are like packing up. And he goes, I want to pray for you. So we're like, okay, just make it quick. And so he says, no, open up your hands. So okay. So we open up our hands, and as soon as he starts praying, I don't know what it was, but I knew it was the Lord, and it was like the love of God hit me, and I completely fell out. And I went into what I describe as an encounter with God, where it felt like he was meeting me face to face, and he was explaining things to me. And I started to see images and hear different noises, and it was like I was in this dream almost, but I knew I wasn't in a dream. And I couldn't be aware of things that were happening around me, but I felt the presence of God on my life. So I knew that something was happening. God was trying to speak to me, but I didn't know what it was. So that carried on for a few hours, actually. I had to be, because I was on the ground and I couldn't get up because I was in this encounter, I had to be picked up, carried into a van, dropped in a van. And keep in mind, I'm not a big crier, but I was weeping because I felt like there was so much love and so much like, I describe it as kind of like a pressure, a heaviness from the Lord when he's trying to speak. He's trying to give you his heart in some way. So I felt that, and it just caused a lot of tears to well up. And in the middle of us, I'm in the van like, oh, laid out, like, oh, crying. In the middle of that, I start to have this internal dialogue with the Lord, and I asked him, like, why do I feel this? Why do I feel kind of like a burden or like this heaviness? I've never felt this in my life. And suddenly he began to speak to me. He said, what you feel is the aching of people, the cry of people within Mexico and Latin America who do not know me, but are crying out for a savior and someone to show them who true love is. And so immediately I was like, oh, even more tears because it's so So that's when the Lord, he's began to speak to me, and he began to reveal to me the reason of why from the young age I was brought into Mexico was not just because my family came, not just because, my parents decided and I had no say. It's because he had placed me in a family that God knew he had set them up and said, you're going to be called to missions in Mexico. And I had to go through this whole journey and discovery of then coming back to it. So obviously there were some bumps in the road of me coming back. But ultimately, about maybe 5 to 6 months after that encounter with God in Ireland, I came back, I came back to Reading, and then five months later, I actually moved back to Mazatlan, Mexico, and started serving full-time missions. And I've actually been there for about close to 4 years doing it full-time.
That's incredible, and that story really is very powerful, and I can tell from how you went from just a kid who went to Ireland and ended up doing all that with those guys, and you ended up balling on because you felt the Lord and you felt the Holy Spirit. I feel like that's really cool. And for me, I'm very young still, so that there's definitely potential of me going to those places and then that happening and sharing those experiences back with you.
Do you think you found your purpose?
Man, I think that I have. I think I battled with that question because purpose felt like doing something meaningful in the eyes of people in this world, of maybe getting a job or having a successful career, going to university. So I think I struggled for a few years, and actually it connects to maybe something you were saying, Noah, is, I waited so long for this purpose thing when I knew that the Lord had been speaking to me, and only realized it when I was in Ireland that the Lord had been speaking to me about Mexico for so long. So I would say God's purpose had to do with, in my life, connected to what I call as our original design, is the identity and the things that God speaks about us. And so I feel like I have found my purpose, and I still feel like I'm walking towards it every day. I don't think I've hit my potential of everything I can do. But I think that I'm on the journey of following that purpose with God. And I think that there's so much hope, because I waited till I was 18 to make a crazy decision to follow Jesus. And it was a really, I had to go through many ups and downs, but many people don't have to go through that. To be honest, the thing I wish I had heard when I was maybe 10 years old and was able to understand some of these things is how much God truly loved me, and that he wasn't only speaking to older people, but he was also speaking to me at the age of 10. And I only really realized it until I was 18, 19, 20, and so many of these memories came back. It was like, oh, God had been speaking to me about Mexico for many, many years. I just didn't know. I just didn't know how to understand or clearly hear his voice and know that it wasn't just my brain or my mind, but it was actually him speaking to me about it. So I would say that I feel like I have walked out and am currently walking out in my purpose. And my purpose is to really see Mexico and Latin America be set on fire for Jesus and to see revival happen. I would say that my contribution to that is I want to see them go to the nations, because I believe that Mexico is such a beautiful country. I believe that they have something to give and to offer other nations as well. And I've actually had the privilege of doing that. I've taken a few outreaches over to Turkey, to Egypt, to Sri Lanka. And every time I've taken Latinos every time I've taken Latinos over there, I have seen so much fruit come from it, because it's different. It's so weird for them to, for people from Sri Lanka, from Egypt, to see Latinos come to their nation with one purpose of sharing the love of Jesus. So that every time I see that, I understand that my purpose is to be a bridge between Latin America and the nations to be able to share Jesus.
That's incredible. Do you have any advice for us to find our purpose?
Yes. If I could give you so much advice, but I would say, the one big thing, the biggest piece of advice I could give you, and maybe this is a lot, is follow Jesus. You do hear his voice. He does speak to you. You are his child. But find Jesus and follow him, and then you'll understand that your purpose and worldly things doesn't really matter. But if you follow him, your purpose will be shown, because he has a purpose for all of us. There's an intentional reason as to why we were created, and he wants to use our lives to bring him glory. So I would say if you stay connected to him, everything will go well.
Thank you so very much. We're very glad to have you on this podcast, and maybe you can come on next time and see what it's all about.
I would love to.
Thank you, Asher. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.
Hit that button.